In this practical course, you'll learn all the essentials of HTML and CSS you need, not through boring explanations, but by actually creating this modern and responsive portfolio website. We'll start with a super quick overview of HTML and CSS and their basic features. We'll also learn the basics of Figma and how to use Figma designs as a developer to convert them into websites. And you can skip to this timestamp if you already know these basics. Next, we'll start from scratch and build each section of our portfolio, and along the way you'll learn how to convert Figma designs into an HTML and CSS code. You'll learn about HTML tags, semantic elements, and accessibility, and about CSS features like flexbox, grid, CSS variables and animations, and much more. And finally, we'll make our portfolio website responsive, and we'll make sure it looks good not only on desktops but also for tablets and mobile phones by using CSS media queries and breakpoints and responsive design techniques. By the end of this course, you won't just understand the theory, but you'll also have practical skills to build your next project yourself and a real portfolio website that you can customize and use. And a pro tip, if you want to save yourself some time, you can watch this video at double speed, and with that, let's get started. Alright, before we dive into building our first website, let's do a super quick theory recap to make sure we are all on the same page. But since this is a crash course, I'll keep it very brief. So let's start with HTML, which is a hypertext markup language. So it is not a programming language, but a markup language. This is the structure of your website. Let's say we want to show this text on the screen of a website. We will use HTML tags to do that. We will use the P tag, which stands for paragraph, with the opening and closing tag, and we will place this text inside of these tags. So this will be a paragraph on our screen. This first part is the opening tag of this HTML element. Then we have the content inside of it, which is the text that we are going to show. Then we have this closing tag, which closes the paragraph, and it also has this forward slash, which marks the end of this element. And this whole thing from the opening tag to the closing tag and the content inside of it is called an HTML element. HTML elements can also have attributes that look something like this. In this case, the class is the name of this attribute and the editor node is the value of this attribute. And with this class, we gave this paragraph a unique identifier. So later we can select this class and apply CSS styles to it. That was an example of a paragraph tag, but we can also have many more other tags. For example, we can have headers, which is with h1 tag. We can have images on our screen with the image tag. And notice that image is self-closing tag. It doesn't have the closing image tag. Instead, it closes itself. These type of tags are called self-closing tags. And then you can also nest tags within each other. So we have paragraph here, and then we have a nested strong tag, and then we have the closing paragraph tag. And similarly, we have this header, for example, which contains all of these tags, and then it comes with the closing tag. So we can nest paragraphs and text within each other. That's the basics of individual HTML elements, but they aren't very useful on their own. They are usually wrapped in an HTML file, and a typical HTML file looks like this. So it always has this doc type at the beginning, which marks the type of this document, which is an HTML. Then it always starts with HTML opening and closing tag, which wraps everything in this file. And then the two main parts are the head and the body. Inside of the head we can have things like title of this web page, or we can link CSS files to it from here also, and also other meta tags. And the body is the main content, so everything you see on the screen of a website, that is within the body. That's the basics of HTML. Now let's move on to the CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets. And this is also not a programming language, and it's not a markup language either. CSS, as the name suggests, is a style sheet language. And this is what makes the websites look good. It lets you control the colors, fonts, layout, and overall visual style of every HTML element. For example, if we want to apply some styles to this paragraph element, we can select the paragraph element in the CSS file and set the color of it to red. In this case, the P is the selector, so we select the paragraph tag, but we can similarly select h1 tags, images, and all the other tags. And then we have the property, which is this color in this case, and then we set the value of this property, which is red, and it can be any other color. Color is just one example. We can set the color to red, we can set the width of the paragraph, we can set border to it, we can set the background color and anything else that we want to. And we can set multiple elements at once. We can select paragraphs, list items, h1 tags, and set all of their color to red. Or we can combine them and set any other property that we want. But this is just one type of selecting elements. There are different selectors. The one that we saw is this one, which is an element selector. So we select the element by its type, which is the paragraph. But then we have the ID selector. In case of ID selector, we set the ID property and then the value of this property, similar to how we saw for the class attribute. And then in the CSS file, we can select this by its ID instead of its tag. Next, we have the class selector as we saw previously. We can set the class attribute and set the name of this class. And then in the CSS file, we can select it by its class. And then we have the attribute selector where we can select the element on the page with specific attribute. And lastly, we have the pseudo class selector where we can select the element but in a specific state. For example, the A tag, but only when we hover on it and so on. And one more important thing about CSS is its box model. CSS layout is mostly based on the box model, and this means that each element takes up some space, meaning box, on your screen. For example, if we consider a paragraph tag like this, first it has paddings around it, which is the space around the content, so that is this part from here to this border. And it has the padding from the top, it has the paddings from the left, from the bottom, and also from the right. Then each element has border, which is the solid line just outside of the padding. It has border from the top, from the right, from the bottom, and also from the left. And then outside of that, we also have margin, which is the space outside of the border. So similar to padding, we have margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. And we use these three properties of padding, border, and margin to control the positioning of this element on our screen. For example, we can position the h1 tag based on these properties. So we can set the margin to 0, which means that the margins from all sides, top, left, right, and bottom, are 0. Next, we can set padding to it to 20 pixel and 0. So this means that the top and bottom paddings will be 20 pixels, but left and right will be 0. And except box model, we also have the flex and grid for positioning elements on the screen, and we will cover this once we start building our portfolio website. Now I know that this was very fast, but that's the advantage of a crash course. We are going to get hands-on with all of this very soon. So I recommend you watch the crash course and build this project with me, and then you can check out the resources of MDM docs for HTML and CSS, and you can dive deeper once you know how to build websites. Here you can find more in-depth explanations and examples. Now let's move on to the Figma design that we are going to build. If you haven't heard of it before, Figma is a very popular design tool that has become super popular among web designers and web developers. And we are going to learn how to use Figma to make our lives easier as we build our portfolio website. Here we have our beautiful portfolio website that we are going to build. Now we won't get into super details of Figma because we are coders and not designers, but getting comfortable with at least the basic features of Figma is important for developers as well. Because usually it's the designer's job to create the Figma files and share them with you, but you need to know at least the basics of how to use them, because that's how you collaborate with designers in a real co-working environment in a company. So your first step is to go to figma.com and create an account if you don't have one yet. And once you create an account, grab the design link from the description and you will be redirected to this page. Here, click on Open with Figma, and this will open up the design that we are going to build. Let's learn the Figma basics on this file. First, you can zoom in and out by using Ctrl and scroll on your mouse. You can see that we have a couple of frames here, and each of the pages in this website is represented as one frame in Figma. You can see we have a frame for contacts page, for home page, for about page, and also for the projects page. Next, below the frames, we have layers. So if you expand the home page, for example, you can see we have many layers for the header, for the quote, for the projects and skills, and so on. You can select projects, for example, by clicking on this layer. But the easier way is to just double click on part that you want to select. For example, let's say we want to select this header. We will just double click on it and double click again, and then we will select this header from the design. Now let's say that I want to see the properties of this, like color, size, and so on. After you have double clicked on it, you will see we have another panel on the right side. And here we can see the font family, for example, which is Fira code. We can see the font weight, which is semi-bold. It can be also medium bold and so on. And we also have the font size, which is 42. And below that we also have the colors. So the primary color, which is the purple, is this one. And we also use white for the rest of the text. We can also scroll left and right by holding Shift button and scrolling with your mouse. This way you can go left and right in the project. And except these frames that we have, which represent the pages of this website, you can see we also have other layers. These are the reusable components of this website that designers extract, which are things like inputs, buttons, icons, and so on. For example, let's say you want to add another social link here, let's say LinkedIn, but it's not here in the icons. You can come here and select the LinkedIn icon here, and you can download the SVG and use it. And another feature is you can also communicate with designers here. So if you're working on this project with a designer, you can simply select the chat icon from the top here, and wherever you want to leave a comment or leave a question, you click on it, and here you can type your question and hit enter. This will leave a comment for designer, and then you can start communicating here under this chat. And lastly, Figma has a very powerful developer mode, which you can toggle on by clicking on this icon here. So if we toggle this on and select an element from the screen, you can see the exact CSS properties here on the right side, and it is much easier for developers in this mode. You can, for example, hover on the bottom text and see the spacing between them. Even viewing dimensions, spacings, and paddings, it's much easier in dev mode for developers. This developer mode is a paid feature though, and you might not have access to this. If you're a student, you can apply for it in this link. If you go to the pricing tab, you can see that this is free for students and educators. So you can go here, and after you get verified, you can use this for free. But that's just a side note, and in this course we mainly will use the main Figma mode because we don't want to cheat and we'd like to build this without any external help. And if you're working for a company, usually they will buy the professional plan for the whole team, so you can use the dev mode for free there as well. So that's very brief explanation of what Figma is and how to use it. Now let's dive into coding. We are going to start to build our portfolio website, and the first thing we'll tackle is the navbar. This is usually this top section of the screen, where you'll find the logo, the navigation links, and sometimes other elements like a search bar or social media icons. So we'll use our Figma design as a guide to create our HTML structure, and then we will style it with CSS. First thing we should do is to create a project folder. So I'll create a folder on my desktop named Portfolio. And we need to drag and drop this into your code editor. And if you don't have a code editor set up yet, I will link a quick 8-minute video here where you can set it up. Initially, we need to create our HTML file here. For that, click on this new file icon. And let's create a file named index.html and hit enter. It's not mandatory at all to name it like this, but it's very common to name your entry file as index.html. Now here we need to start with an HTML skeleton, and for that type exclamation mark. And you can see that it suggests to fill in this HTML skeleton, so hit enter. And we have our HTML skeleton which we can start with. The first line is the doc type as we saw previously, then it comes with an HTML opening and closing tag. In the end of this file we have some meta tags and the title of the web page which we will see on our screen. And lastly we have the body where we will do most of our work. Now if we save this file with Command S or Ctrl S on Windows, we can right click on this file and click on Open with Live Server. And this will open our HTML file in the browser where you can see it is blank for now. And we see the document title here. And if you don't see this option here, Open with Live Server, then you need to just install the Live Server extension in your VS Code. And this Live Server helps us see our changes real time. For example, I can change this document now. Let's name this portfolio and save again. And if we go back, you can see it is changed real time and we don't need to close and reopen this after every change. Okay, so now let's build our navigation bar. So if you'll take a closer look here, we have this logo and the icon on the left, and we have navigation items on the right side. We need to go back to our HTML file, and inside of the body, we need to create the navigation. First, we will create a header tag, which will wrap all the navigation items. And inside of the header, we will create a nav element, which stands short for navigation. And this will be the container for our entire navbar. And inside the navigation, as we saw on the left side, we have this logo and the icon. For now, let's just create the logo with h1 tag, which is a heading. And here this should be your name if you're creating a portfolio for yourself. So I will name this as we have in the Figma. And under that we will have the navigation items. We will wrap the navigation items inside of the UL, which stands for unordered list. And inside of it we will have list items, and each list item will represent one item in our navigation. And since each of these are links, so if you click on works for example, it should redirect you to the works tab. We also need to wrap them inside of an A tag, which stands for link. Let's also create this A tag and write the name of the first navigation item, which is home. And we see that we have 4 of these: works, about me, and contacts. So let's duplicate this 3 times. And you can do this quickly with holding Option, Shift, and down. So you do 1, 2, 3 times. Now let's rename each item. This one is works, this one is about me, and we have contacts. Save this and let's see what we have now. And we have the basic structure here. Of course, this is not styled yet, so we will apply styles shortly. And to apply styles, we need to select these elements somehow in our CSS file. And as you saw previously, we can either select them by tag names, but the better way is to select them by class names. Let's give class names to the items that we are planning to select. First, for the navbar, we will add a class, and let's name this navbar. The heading tab, let's name this logo. And the wrapper of our elements, let's name this navlist. And we will also need to select each of the items individually. Let's add class name for each of them and name them nav item. We need to copy this for all of the items. Now for the A tags, except adding class names, we also need to add another property to them, which is mandatory for A tags, and that is the href attribute. And this tells our browser where it should redirect the user after they click on this tag. For example, when they click on home, we want to redirect them to index.html. And let's also add a class name for this, and let's name this navlink. We need to copy this for all of the other items. But we need to change the href attribute for each of them. For example, this one should redirect them to work.html, and this one should redirect to aboutme.html, and the last one to contacts.html. Now if we save this and go back, you see each of them is turned to a link now. So if we click on works, it redirects us to /works.html. And we get an error because we don't have the work.html yet. So we can go back here and create a new file and call this work.html. Now if we go back, if we click on works, it redirects us to the works page, which is blank for now. I will remove this for now because it's empty. So our HTML basic structure is ready. Now let's switch to CSS and start styling this. First thing we usually do in projects is create a global styles. So we will name this global.css. Here we set the global styles, which are things like the font family that we use across the app, or the global margins and the website background, and so on. Let's click on one of the items on our screen. You can see that we are using Fira code font family across the app, so we need to set this first. For that, we will apply all of the global styles to the body, and we will open curly braces like this. And here is where we write the styles. We set the font family to be Fira code. And after that we can do comma and set another font family in case this one is missing on the user device. And the second one will be monospace. We usually also reset the margin of the body. If you right click here and do inspect and hover on the body, you can see that it has some margins across it. And the margin is the spacing that is wrapped in orange. And you can see that by default we have 8 pixel margins, which we want to reset. So we will go back and also add margin property and set this to 0. And last thing for our global stylings, let's also set the background color, which is the color that we see in the Figma. And that is this background color that you see here. If you click on this icon, you will see the color here, and we can copy this and set the background color to be hashtag this color name. Now if we save and go back, you see that our changes haven't been applied yet, and that is because our HTML file doesn't know about the CSS file yet. So after creating the CSS file, we also need to link it here with the link tag, and we set the rel attribute to be style sheet. And the important attribute is href, which is pointing to our style. So this will be globals.css. And this is a self-closing tag, so we just need to self-close it and hit save. Now our file has been linked, and if we go back, you can see that the font family and the background color has been set, and also the margins of the body. Next thing you also see, we have a color palette in our Figma. We have primary, gray, background, white, and this is used across the app. And it's a good practice to also create a theme in our web template so that we have these colors and we can reuse them across our code. For that, let's go back here and create another file called theme.css. Now in this theme.css, we can set the color palettes that we are planning to use. And you do this by two dots root and opening curly braces. And here you can set your variables. First one is primary color. And let's grab the color from the Figma file. So this is the primary color. And then we do the same for all of the other colors. So next one is gray. Then we have the background color. And lastly, we have the white color. Now, if we save this, we also need to link this file in our HTML file. Just duplicate this file and name it as theme.css and save. And how we are going to use our theme variables. The first example can be in our globals. You can see that we have set our background color here to a hard-coded value. So instead of doing it like this, we will remove this. And here we can use the CSS variables by typing var. And inside of it, you point to the CSS variable. In our case, it's the background variable and hit enter. And if we save this and go back to our website, you can see that the background color is still applied, but it's coming from the global theme variables instead of being hard-coded in our code. Now let's start styling our elements that you see on the screen. And we will create the last CSS file for this. And this will hold all of the main styles inside of it. It will be called style.css. And let's make this side by side with index.html like this and close the navigation with Command B so we have a lot of space. First thing we should do is apply styles to our header, and the header is this part from the Figma design. For example, this h1 tag has some spacing from top and bottom, and the way you can see these spacings is by hitting Option and holding on it. So you can see we have some paddings from the top, which is 32 pixels. And some paddings from the bottom, which is 8 pixels, and that's the same for these navigation items as well. We need to go back to our file and apply styles to our header, which will have padding top to be 32 pixels and padding bottom to be 8 pixels. The next thing that we see is that these are side by side, so we have this on the left side and we have the navigation items on the right side. And in our case, they are below each other, so we need to make it like this. And for that, we need to use CSS Flexbox. You can think of a flexbox as a way to line up items in a row or column. You can control the direction they flow, how they align, and whether they wrap the text line and how much space they take up. So we need to apply the flexbox to our navbar and select the navbar with the class name because we have it set here. And again open the curly braces. First thing we do is to set display to flex, which makes this a flex container, and this gives us control over how elements are arranged within a container. Next we will set the justify content property to be space between, and this will push the logo and nav links to the opposite ends of the navbar, so the logo will be on the left and the navbar items will be on the right. And lastly, we need to align items to be centered, and this will vertically center the logo and the links within the navbar. Now let's save this and go back. You can see that nothing has changed, and by now you should know what's the issue here. We need to go back and link this CSS file because we didn't do it. We will also link the style.css and save. And now you can see that the logo is on the left side and the nav items are on the right side. Another issue here is that it doesn't have any width, so it's spread across the screen. And if you take a look at our navbar, you can see that it has a maximum width of 1024 pixels, so we need to set this. Below the align items, we can also set the max width of it to be 1024 pixels. And if we save and go back, this is now 1024 pixels, but it is aligned to the left. We need to center it. And the way we center divs in CSS is by doing margin, 0 and auto. This basically means that we are applying margin 0 from top and bottom, but we are applying margin auto from right and left, and this will horizontally center our element like this. So let's continue through them line by line. We applied styles to the header and to the navbar. Now we need to apply styles to the h1, which is the logo. For that, we copy the class name and apply styles to this class. Our logo element should be white, as we see here in the colors. It doesn't have any margins, and the font size is 16 pixels, as we can see here, and it is in bold. The bold is automatically applied since it is an h1 tag, but we need to apply the color to it, and this will be again CSS variable, and it is the white color in our theme. The margin of this should be 0, and we need to apply the font size, which is 16 pixels. If we save and have a look, It is now 16 pixels and this is in white. The next thing is the unordered list, which is wrapping our elements of the navbar. We need to reset the styles of this again, and for that we need to grab the nav list and set the list style to none and reset the margins and paddings of it to 0. Now another thing is they are still stacked below each other, and in the Figma file they are near each other, and for that we just need to apply display flex property on this. If we go back, you can see they are now near each other, and we will fix the paddings shortly. So the way Flexbox works is you set the display to flex to the item you want to, and by default it is aligning items near each other. But if you want to align them below each other, you also need to set the flex direction to column, but by default this is set to row, and this is exactly what we need, so we don't need to apply the flex direction. Now let's fix the spacings between these items and also the colors. If you take a look here, they have 32 pixels between them. The color is set to white and they don't have the underscores that we have in our portfolio. And that is these nav items here that we need to grab by class names. First thing we should do is to set the margin to be 0 from top and bottom and 16 pixels from left and right. So 16 pixels from each item's left and 16 pixels from each item's right. That is 32 pixels that we need to have. And to set the color and underscores of it, we need to grab the a tags class name, which is navlink. First we will apply the color, which is a CSS variable, white, and to remove the underscore we need to set the text decoration property to be none. If we save this and go back, you can see that this starts to look a lot like our Figma design. Another thing is that the active item is only in white and the others are gray. To set this we need to go back and set this to gray. And to select the active item you usually do that with JavaScript, but for now we will do navlink. And we will use the attribute selector in CSS. So we will set the href to be equal to index.html. This means that it will select the item where href equals to index.html, and only in that case we will apply the color to be white. Now we can see that only the home element is in white and the others are in gray. We are also missing these hashtags before each element, which we can of course add by just doing it like this. But the better way of doing it is to do navlink and select the before part of it. This basically appends something before our element, and that something is defined here in the content. So we will set our hashtag here. The color of this should be purple, which is our primary color. And let's also set some spacing between this content and the navigation item. We will set margin from the right to be just 1 pixels. If we save and go back, you can see we also have these hashtags near each element. Now we are not going to implement this language switcher because this also requires JavaScript, so we will just use the navigation items and the logo. Last thing that we are missing from logo is this icon. You can grab it by double clicking on it. And to download this, you click on this export button and let's export this as SVG because it's a lot faster than images. Click on export union and this is now downloaded. We will go back to our project and create another folder here called assets. This is where we will locate all of our images and assets. And the first asset that we have is this image that we have downloaded. We will place it inside of the assets. Let's just rename this to be logo.svg. And now we need to add that inside of our index.html. As we saw, that should be before the h1 element, so we will add it on top of it. And this is an image tag where we will set the source attribute to point to our logo from assets/logo.svg. And a good practice for accessibility is to set the alt attribute for each image and describe what this image is about in case people cannot see it or it's not loaded properly. So we will describe this as website logo, and we need to set some class name to be able to grab this in our CSS file. Let's name this logo/image. And image tags are self-closing, so we will just self-close this tag. But another thing you notice is they are again near each other. This means we need to use flexbox again and we need to wrap them in some wrapper element. And that wrapper element can be an HTML div. We can create a div element, set a class to it to be logo wrapper, and wrap both of these elements inside of that div. Now we can go back to our style.css and select this. Below our navbar, let's select the logo wrapper and set the display property to be flex again, and we will also align items to be center, and this means that both the logo and the image will be vertically centered. Now we have the icon near the logo, and last thing we might do is to set the spacings between them and also set the size of this logo. As you can see, the size of this is width 16 pixels and height 16 pixels, and we can determine the spacings between them again with holding the option. You can see that it's 2.5 pixels, so we can go back and select the logo image, and we need to set the width of it to be 16 pixels and also the height, and the margin right should be 2.5 pixels. Now we have our final look of the header. So we have the logo icon and the logo and also the navigation items on the right side. And this looks pretty close to the Figma design. And now we need to move on to the main content of our portfolio website. And the first part is this section with the hero and image and with the contact button. This is the first thing that visitors see when they land on your page, and it's important to make this eye-catching and informative. Let's start by creating this section in our HTML file, and that will be below our header. We will create the main section. Inside of the main section, let's create a section and give it a class name of hero. This is the first section that you saw. Next, let's see what we have here. On the left side, we have this text. The first one is a heading tag, and the one below it is a paragraph, and we have a button below them. Let's create a wrapper div for this and call it hero content. The first item will be the heading tag. You can copy the content of it by double clicking on it twice and paste it here. And let's do the same for the paragraph tag. And we need to create the button and give a class name to it. Let's say contact button. And here the text is contact me. There is one other thing that we need. You can see that web designer and front-end developer are different color of text. And to be able to control this from CSS, we need to wrap the web designer into a span element and also the front-end developer inside of another span element. That's it for the left side section. Let's see what we have on the right. We have this image and this text below it. Now technically this is multiple images. This is this main image, and if you double click on this, these are separate SVG elements, but that would be the harder way to implement it. And since this is a beginner course, let's just make this as one image. So you can grab the group 46 from here and again export this time as PNG, and this will download this image. Let's go back and also place this image inside of our assets. And for this one, let's just name this person image. And we can go back to our etext.html, and below this section, we will create the section from the right side. So we will again wrap this inside of a div, and let's give it a class name. For example, this can be the hero image. Inside of it, the first thing is the image that we saw. So we need to give the source attribute and point it to assets/person image. And make this a habit to always link an alt attribute to it and describe the photo. So this will be photo of Elias, a web designer and developer. And let's close this image tag as well. And below it we have the text, but this is not just one text. We have the text and we have the purple square on the left side of it. And we have some sort of wrapper that wraps both of this text and the purple square inside of it. By now you probably have an idea that we are going to use Flexbox here again. We will create a wrapper div here, give it a class name. Let's name this portfolio node wrapper. And we can create the purple square by just simple div and apply CSS styles to it. You will see how in the CSS file. Let's just name this purple square. And this will be just an empty div. And below it we will have the paragraph. Let's set a class name to this also. Let's name this portfolio node and copy this text from here. You can see that the portfolio is in bold and the rest of the text is not in bold. And this is where we will use another span element for the portfolio. And that's it. Let's save this and have a look at our file. This is what it looks like without any styling. Now we need to apply CSS to it. Firstly, you can see that this main container that we have is the same width as we have the navbar, and it is wrapped inside of 1024 pixels. And all of the below items as well, everything is 1024 pixels maximum. So we can create a single wrapper for all of them. And for that, let's wrap everything inside of another div and give it a class name of main container. Now we can grab this main container from our style.css file and set it the maximum width to be 1024 pixels. If we just set it like this, it will have 1024 pixels, but it will be aligned on the left. And let's enter this as we did it for the navbar. If you remember, we do that by setting margin to be 0 auto. Next, we will grab this section by its class name hero. As you see, we need to align these items here. So we need to set this group to be on the left side and the image and paragraph to be on the right side. And for that, as you guessed it right, we will use display flags. We will set justify content to be space around, and this will distribute the space around these items. And we need to align them to be centered, vertically aligned. Another property that flex has is the gap. And gap is the space between these left and right items. In our case, it's 18 pixels. So we will set the gap to be 18 pixels. You can see that they are now aligned on the left and right side. We need to set some margins from the top of this, and that is 62 pixels as you can see here. Now we can set the margin here by setting margin top to be 62 pixels. If we save and go back, we also have applied spacings around it. Next, let's style the content inside of this first item. If we go back and click on the header, you can see that it's 32 pixels and some part of it is in white and some part of it is in primary color. First, select the hero content, which is the wrapper of our elements, and apply flex to 1, and this means that we are allowing content to grow and take up space. Next, we will grab the h2 tag inside of the hero content. So we can do hero content space h2, and this means that we are selecting the h2 element here inside of the hero content. After selecting it, let's apply color to it to be CSS variable of white color, and the font size should be 32 pixels. Now that's the main color, but as we saw, we need to apply different color to this text, and that's why we wrap them inside of this span. Now let's see how we can select them. We will do the same hero content, but this time we will select the span inside of them, and we can apply different color to this, and this will be the primary color. If we save this and go back to our file, you can see that most of the text will be in the white, but the ones that are wrapped inside of the span are in primary purple color. Next, let's style this paragraph. As you see here, it is also in gray color, and the size of it is 16 pixels. And we also have some spacing below it from the bottom, and that is 24 pixels. So we can go back and grab the paragraph similar to how we did for h2 and span elements. We will select the hero content and the paragraph inside of it. First, let's set the color to be gray, and let's apply some margin from the bottom, which will be 24 pixels. You can see that our paragraph is also styled now. Now the last thing in this section is this contact button. Let's style that also. We have applied contact button class name to this, so we can select it with that class name. The background color of this is transparent, and it's the same color as in the body. You can see we have some border around it, which is in our primary color. The color of the text is white, and we have some paddings inside of it. And you can see that in this part, from left and right we have 16 pixels, and from top and bottom we have 8 pixels. Let's go back and apply these styles. So we will apply background color to be transparent. We will set the border of it to have 1 pixel weight. We will set this to be a solid line. And lastly, we will set the color of it to be in our primary color. Now the color of the text should be white, and that is the white variable here. And we will set paddings to it. As we saw, it is 8 pixels from top and bottom and 16 pixels from left and right. And usually for the buttons, you set the cursor of it to be pointer. And that is when you hover on it, instead of being the regular cursor, it will become pointer. This is how our button looks like currently. So if we hover on it, you can see the pointer here. And if we hover off it, you have the regular cursor. One more thing we can do for the button, let's add some transition animation on it when we hover on it. For that, you select the same contact button, but instead of hover, and we can set the background color of it to become our primary color when we hover on it. And we will add some transition to it with transition property. We will apply this on the background color. The next attribute is the delay of seconds, which is how long we want this to take. And the type of animation, it can be is in and out, and is out. Let's set this to is. And what this means is that we are applying transition to the background color. Let's go back and see how that looks like. If we hover on it, it slowly becomes the primary color. And when we hover off it, it becomes the transparent color. And the last thing we need to style is this portfolio node. Let's see how that should look like. We should have this square as we defined in the div, so we need to apply stylings to it to have 16 pixels width and height and to be in our primary color. The text that is near it should be in gray, but the span should be in white. So let's go back and create the square first. For the square, we have applied purple square class. We can copy this and go back and select it in our CSS file. We need to set width of it to be 16 pixels and also the height of it to be 16 pixels. And we can set the background color to be primary, and this will create that square on our screen. Next, let's style this paragraph, and that is the portfolio node class. The color of it is variable of gray, and the font size is 16 pixels, but we need to select the span inside of it and set the color of this to be white, and the font weight of it should be bold. If we save and go back, we also applied the styling of this text. Now we need to position them near each other. If you see here, they are positioned near each other. They have some spacings between them, which is 10 pixels. And overall, their wrapper has a border, which is in gray color. And it has paddings from left and right, which is 8 pixels, and also from top and left, which is again 8 pixels. So if we go back here, we need to style our portfolio node wrapper. We will use the display to set it to flex, and this will align our items near each other. We will also align them vertically with center. We will set the spacings between them with the gap property, and that is 10 pixels as we saw. And it also has border, which is 1 pixel, solid, and the color of it was in gray. And we need to set the paddings of it from left and right and top bottom. But since this was the same from all directions and it's 8 pixels, we can just apply padding 8 pixels here. We have it applied, but you can see we have some strange spacings around it. And to determine what's the issue, let's right click, inspect element. And here you can see that the paragraph class inside of it has some unnecessary margins from top and bottom. And we can even verify it here by setting margin of it to be 0. And that's what we need to do here. We need to grab the portfolio node, which is that paragraph, and set the margin of it to be 0. Now it looks very close to our Figma design, but you can see in our design we also have a fixed width for this element. We need to apply that to the wrapper and set the width of it to be 402 pixels. And another issue you notice is these are not centered, so this element and the image are not centered vertically. And this is where we will use flex again, but finally with setting flex direction to column, because we need to center them vertically instead of horizontally. We will go back and select the wrapper of them. And you can see that image and portfolio node are wrapped inside of the hero image. Let's select that class here, and we need to first apply display flex to it. But this time we will also apply flex direction to be column. And we will align them with align items, setting it to center. And if we save and go back, this text is now centered with our image and it looks very close to our Figma design. And that's it for this part. Next, let's create this small section and then we'll move on to the projects and skills. Now let's add this quote section and the social media links on the left. And notice how these icons and line are designed to stay fixed in place even as we scroll down. And this quote is just a humorous twist. You can add such things to your portfolio to make it sound less formal. First, let's create the HTML structure for this quote and the social media links, and then let's style them in CSS. Let's go back to our index.html, and below this section of the hero, let's add another section and give it a class name of quote. So this will be the quote section. Now inside of it, we need to add this text and the caption, and we can add this as paragraph or heading, but another semantic tag that we can use here is the block quote tag. And this tag is specifically used for quoting others in your content. Here, instead of just text, we can use the block quote element and copy and paste text from here. And we will use another semantic element here called fig caption. And this is used for captioning the text on screen. And here we will copy and paste this text and save the file. So that's it for the quote section. And now for the social links, obviously they are outside of our main container and we can place this either in the navbar in the same section or outside of them. We will need one element to render this line and that will be an empty div. And we'll need these items which are social media links. Let's go back and add it outside of the header, between the header and main section. And this will be a simple div with a class name Let's name this social links. Inside of this, we will need one empty div for rendering the line. And let's give it a class name so we can style it. This will be the social links line. And we will need to add the social links, and this is a list of links, so we will use the unordered list here, and inside of it we will have list items, and since each of the items is a link to external website, we need to use the a tag and give it an attribute of href. For example, this first one will be the link to your GitHub. You need to place the GitHub link here, but for now we can use a hashtag, which is just an empty link. And inside of it, we need to add the image, which are these SVG icons from here. So we need to download all of this. If you double click on the first one, this will select the GitHub icon. And from the right side, you can export it as SVG. And I will do the same for all of the icons. Now let's say in your case, you want to link something else instead of Figma. You can scroll up and pick the icon that you want. For example, if you want to link your LinkedIn, you can add it there. And after downloading all of them, let's copy them inside of our assets and name them properly. For example, the first one is GitHub icon, the next one is the website icon, and the last one is the Figma icon. Now we need to link those images inside of our a tag, so we will use an image tag. And the source of this needs to point to that SVG images. So the first one is the GitHub inside of our assets. And let's add the alt text for this, which will be GitHub icon. And we need to copy these list items 2 more times. We will use Opt, Shift and down arrow 2 times, and this will copy it. And we just need to rename the SVGs. So this one will be website icon. The next one will be Figma icon. And we also need to change the alt text. So this one will be website icon. And this one will be Figma icon. If we save this and go back to our website, we can see how it looks like without styling. We have these elements on the screen and we also have the social media links. Now we need to style them with CSS. Let's start from the quote item. For the quote, we can see that the text is centered and it should be white. It has a gray bordering around it and it is also centered inside of our main container. So we can go back into our style.css. First, let's just add a comment for quote section. And you can hit command / and this will make this as a comment. And let's open up the index file on the right side so that we can see the classes we are styling. First we are styling this quote section and we need to grab the quote section. For this we will apply styling for text alignment and we will align it to center. As we saw, it has a gray border around it, so we will add border property and this will be 1 pixel solid style and in gray color. And lastly, to center this inside of our main container, if you remember, we use margin 0 auto for that. Now if we save this and go back, you will see that we have the text centered and the border around it, but we also need to add some spacing between the quote and this section. And if we have a look at the Figma design, we can see that it uses 112 pixels between these sections, and we can notice that it uses this constantly. For example, between skills and about me section, it also uses 112 pixels. It's a bit inconsistent between other sections. For example, here it's 106 pixels and so on. But usually you'll communicate with designer in these scenarios and you'll use a constant spacing. So in our case, let's use that 112 pixels as the standard spacing between the sections. And to not repeat ourselves every time, so instead of adding margin bottom for each section and setting this to 112 pixels, we can use this globally on our main container. So if you go back to our main container class, here we can set this container to be display flex and the flex direction will be column. And we can apply gap to it instead and set it to 112 pixels. And this means that everything inside of this main container, so all of these sections, will have consistent 112 pixel spacings between them. And we can go back and verify it by looking at our website. So now we have 112 pixels between these, and we will have this same spacing between all of the sections inside of our main container. Next, we need to change the text properties. In our Figma file, if you double click on this, you can see that it uses the white color. The font size of this is 24. And the font weight is medium, but instead of using medium in code we use numbers instead of it. If you click on variable font axis, you will see that medium is equal to 500 and we will use the 500 font weight for this. And except that it also has some paddings, so it has 32 pixels from the right and left and it also has 32 from top and bottom. Now we can go back and select that text by selecting the block quote element inside of our quote class. First we will apply the color to it to be white. Next, the font size of this was 24 pixels. The font weight is 500 and the padding for this will be 42 pixels from top, bottom and also right and left. Now you'll notice that the spacing is a bit too much and we can verify what's the issue by right clicking on it and going inspect element. You can see that we have some margins but we didn't set margins to it. And this is because by default the block quote element has margin inline start and margin inline end to 40 pixels and we need to reset it by setting margin to 0. And also one other thing is we set the font weight to 500. But if I toggle this off and on, you will notice we don't have any changes. And that's because by default the font weight is set to 500. But for any other cases where the font weight is not 500, we need to state that explicitly. And this means we will remove this from here and we will add margin 0 to it. Now the hard part of styling this quote will be to add these elements. You'll notice we have these pseudo elements from the start and also from the end. And this is done by selecting the before and after elements of this quote. To be able to do that, we need to select the before and after of the block quote. So we will select the before element and also the after element by separating them with commas. And here we need to add their content and that will be the double quotes that we have there. Now if we just have a look what we have right now, we have this before and after elements attached to it, but we need to move this one to the top and this one to the bottom. And for that we need to use absolute positioning. So we need to set the position to be absolute here. And one important thing for this to work, we need to set the position to relative of this quote. And this is necessary for absolute positioning of the pseudo elements, which are the before and after. So we will set the position to be relative here. And let's also add the color of it, which was gray. And the font style of this was italic. Now you can see that our pseudo element has absolute positioning. And this means that we can move it up and down independent from our text. For example, to the before element, we can add top positioning to be minus 10 pixels. And you'll notice how it went up, but we are missing some styles here. If we go back to our Figma design, first of all, we need to make this a bit large and we cannot see it here because this is not set to be text. So here we need to make this a bit larger. For example, let's set the font size to be 56 pixels. This is more closer and the font weight should be bold. And let's try increasing this top position to be, for example, minus 20. And we will apply this only for the before element. The after one should be on the bottom. And one other thing is that we need to have some background for this, because right now we can see the line below it, but in Figma design we don't have the line, so this should cover it. And for that we need to apply some background to this. We can just add background image, and instead of adding an image here, we can use the linear gradient from CSS and set any background that we want. And in our case, we will just set our gray color. You'll notice that the background is a bit large, so we will need to control the background size. We can set this to be 100% from left and right, but then set this to be 30% from top and bottom. And to remove these parts, we need to just set background repeat to no repeat property. And let's just increase this a bit more. Let's say 40 or 45%. And that should be it. We can just copy these styles from here and go back and paste them here. We need to replace the background image here. So instead of black transparent, we will use var and our background color. And we don't want this to be gradient, so we will just use the same color here without this first property. And that just means that it will be solid background color. Now this top property only needs to be applied to before pseudo element. We will select it separately and apply the top styling to it. And similarly, we need to do this for the after element. But in case of after element, we need to apply positive spacing, let's say 50 or 60 pixels. If we save and go back, the before element looks very good, but we need to alter the after element. Before doing that, let's just move this fig caption out of these borders. If you notice here, the caption is outside of the borders. It has a font size of 24 pixels and also padding of 16 pixels from top, left, bottom, right. And it has the same border as our quote. Now we can select it by selecting the fig caption inside of our quote. First of all, we need to set the position to be absolute, and this will move this out of the borders. Next, the color of this should be gray, and the font size, as we saw, it should be 24 pixels. and the padding which it has, which is 16 pixels. We will copy and paste the same border that our quote has. And that's it, just one small thing, we need to move this to the right side of that. And since we are using absolute positioning, we can just use right -1 pixel and this will move it to the right side. Now this is much easier to style the after element. We need to just increase this value until it reaches to the middle of our line. But we also need to add some spacing from the right side to move this below the bill word. Let's start from 10 pixels and just gradually increase that until it reaches to the middle. So 20 pixels should be enough. And similarly, let's move the before elements a bit to the left. So we will add the left property to it and just gradually increase this to the same 20 pixels. So we will apply these properties to the after element and we will apply this same property to the before element but from the left. And the last thing, let's just remove the top border from the caption so that we see the background of this. And for that we will just apply border top to be none. That's it for the caption section and this looks very close to the Figma design. And designing these social links after that will be pretty easy. Let's go back and design our social links. First of all, we need the length of this line and that is 191 pixels and the width of it is 1 pixels. Let's add a section below this for social links and make this a comment. And first let's select the social links line from here that we added. We will set the width of this to be 1 pixels and the height will be 191 pixels. And to color this, we will set the background color to be in gray color and the display of this will be block. Now we can see that line on our screen, but this is not positioned correctly. And for that we need to apply stats to the wrapper. You can see that it's positioned 17 pixels from the left and the elements inside of it have 8 pixel gaps. So before this we will select the social links class. First of all we will apply position to be fixed for this one because this will be fixed on our screen even if users scroll down. Next we will set the display to be flex for this one and the flex direction is column because they are below each other. We will align all of the items to be centered. And we will also justify the content to be centered. And after this we need to just apply the left spacing and that is 17 pixels. And it needs to be 0 from top because it starts from the top of our screen. And lastly we need to apply the gaps to it and we will use 8 pixel gaps between all of the items. If we save this and go back, now we have it properly positioned. And lastly, we just need to style the unordered list. So we need to remove these bullets and we also need to apply the spacings between our social media links. For that, we will select the social links and then the unordered list inside of it. First, we will set the list style to be none and this will get rid of the bullets. Then we will reset all of the spacings of it because by default the unordered list also has paddings and margins, and to reset that we will just set margin to be 0 and paddings to be 0, and we need to set this to be display flex again with flex direction being column, and the same spacing that we have between the line and social media links, we also have that same spacing between the social media links, so we will set the gap of it to be 8 pixels. And that's it, now we have this positioned correctly and also the gaps between them. And we have our quote section in the middle. Next, let's create the project section. We have this projects heading and this link on the right side which redirects users to the projects page, that is this one. And below that we have these cards. Each of the cards contains just an image of that project, the text tag, the name of that project and a short description below it, and 2 buttons near each other. And this is where we will use the CSS grid for the first time. Grid is just another way to create a responsive layout that adapts to different screen sizes. And it's often confused when to use grid and flexbox for junior developers. But the rule for this is very simple. When you need to use 2-dimensional layouts, you use grid. And with this you can position the items with rows and columns. And in cases where you just need 1 dimension, you use flexbox. And here we have these 3 items, but let's say we want to add another row below it and we need to display 6 items. In that case we will use grid. And also in the mobile view, even if we have these 3 items, we may need to show 2 items near each other and the last item in a new row. And this is the scenario where we will use grid instead of flexbox. For that, let's create a new section below the quote section. And the class name for this will be projects. This will be the wrapper of the projects and also the header. So first let's create the header with a simple div and give this a class name to be projects header. And it contains one element, which is the header. We will use h2 for this. And on the right side of that we had the link. So this will be an a tag and the class of this will be projects link. And the href is where it targets to, and this needs to redirect users to the projects.html file, which will be the projects page. Inside of that we have this view all text. We will copy and paste it here. And below that we have the project individual cards. We will first create a wrapper for them, and the class name for this will be project cards. This is where we will apply the grid styling. And inside of it we have individual project cards, and this one will be project card with single name. Now each of them has an image at the top. Then we have this list of text tag, and we will use an unordered list for this. Below that we have another div with the project name. This will be another heading with a description, which is probably a paragraph, and with two buttons near each other. One is redirecting to the live version of this project, and another can be, for example, the source code or anything you want. For that, let's first download the images from here. So as before, we click on the image and then we export this as PNG, and do the same for all of the images. Now we need to move those also to the assets and name this properly. The first one is called chart nodes. Next we have project X, and this one is called Kahoot. Now from our HTML file we can link to those images. So we will create an image tag, and the source of this will point to assets and the chart nodes for the first one. The alt text of this will be screenshot of project chart nodes. And below this we have the unordered list of the text tag. For each of them we will use a list item. We will add the first one for the HTML and then copy this 3 more times. Next one is a CSS, this one is Python, and the last one is Flask. And below this we have the project information div. So we will create another div and call this project info. Here we have another heading, which is the project name, and that will be an h3 tag with the name of the first project. And below it we have the description, which is just another paragraph. Let's copy and paste the description from here. And lastly we have two buttons. Now since we are going to position these buttons near each other, let's wrap them inside of another div and give it a class name of project links. And we will need to create two buttons here with an a tag inside of it, and this will point to the project. For now we will just set it to be empty. Then you can replace this with the project link. And we will copy and paste the button text inside of it. And let's duplicate this button and copy and paste this other text. And since we have 3 project cards, we need to duplicate this into 2 more. Now you can notice that in our Figma design, the project cards are very similar and have the same structure, even though the content is a bit different. And ideally, we want to avoid duplicating code and repeating our code for 2 more times for the same structure. And in programming, this is called dry, which stands for don't repeat yourself. And it's a simple principle that just means this: whenever you notice yourself repeating similar code more than twice, you should consider reusing it instead of continuing to repeat it 10 more times, for example. And we can avoid duplicating by using JavaScript, but since this is just an HTML and CSS crash course, for now we will duplicate this, but just know that this is not a good practice, and in an ideal world you want to reuse this as much as possible. So we will duplicate this for 2 more times, and we need to add the text tag and images for the other elements. So this one is the project X, and we have React, Express, Discord.js and Node.js for this one. We'll change the image to be project X, and we'll add 4 more items here. And this will say screenshot of project X. We'll change the headings. So I'll quickly do this and you can do it on your own. Now we can save this and have a look how it looks like with just pure HTML. You can see we have our cards and the header, and now we just need to position them and style them. First we need to style our heading and set the color of it to be white. By now you may notice that we consistently use white for all of the headings, and we use gray for all the paragraphs and small text. So this is another good place to use the dry principle, and we don't need JavaScript for this. We can go back to our global styles and style all of the headings at once. So we can select from H1 to H6 tags, and we can set the color of all of them to be white. And we can similarly style all of the paragraphs and set the color of them to be gray. And if we go back, you can see that it's white by default. And in fact, for all of the other headings and paragraphs where we explicitly set the color, we can now remove it because it is set globally in our global.css file. So inside of style.css, you can just search for color. For example, the logo, this is the h1 tag, and we set the color to be white. We can remove this one. For the heading 2 inside of our hero content, we also have the explicit color. We can remove this as well. For the hero content paragraph, we set the color to be gray. We can remove this one. And for the portfolio note, which is another paragraph here, we set the color to be gray. We can get rid of this as well. And if we save and go back, you can see that it looks exactly the same. We just eliminated a couple of unnecessary lines from our CSS file. Now let's style this a bit further. For the project's text, you can see that it is 32 pixels and it's medium font weight, so we don't need to change the weight of it. We need to use flexbox here to align this on the left side and to align the link on the right side. Let's go back and create another section. Let's name this project section. Here we will first select the project's header and we will use flex here, so we will use display flex. We will justify content to be space between, and this will push the heading to the left and the A tag to the right. And we will also align items to be center so that our heading and A tag are horizontally centered. Next, we will select the heading tag inside of our project's header and we'll set the font size of it to be 32 pixels. If you go to our design, you can see that all of the project headings are h2 tags and all of them are 32 pixels. So this is another option for us to set global stylings. Instead of setting it here, we can set all of the h2 tags to be 32 pixels and we can move this to our global styles. And with that, we don't need this property anymore. If we just save and go back, we have our projects and it is 32 pixels. If you inspect, you can see that it's 32 pixels here. Now here we again need to use the before attribute and set it to be this hashtag. And to do that, as we saw in the previous section, we first need to set the position of this to be relative, and then we can style the pseudo elements of it. So next we will select the project's header, heading 2, before part of that. So the content of this is a hashtag, and the color of this is the purple, which is our primary color. And now we have our hashtag near the text, but you see we also have the after element, and that is this line on the right side. So the length of this is around 500 pixels and it has a width of 1 pixels. The color is the same purple color and it has 16 pixels gap between the projects and the line. Now to style this, we need to select the after element of it. We will set the content of this to be empty because instead we are going to style this with the background color. So we'll set the background color to be the primary color. The width of this is 500 pixels and the length, which is the height, is 1 pixels. We again need to set the position of this to be absolute. And to add the gap between this line and the heading, we need to set the right property of that to be 16 pixels, but with minus because this is on the right side. And one more thing we need to add is the top property, which will be 50%. And this just means that it will be horizontally centered with our heading tag. Now if we go back, this is horizontally centered, but we just need to move this to the right side of it. And for that we will use the transform property. This makes it to a two-dimensional vector, and the first one is the x coordinates of that and the second one is the y coordinates. For the x we will use 100% and for the y we will use minus 50%, and this will move it to the right side of our heading. If we save and go back, you can see that this is now positioned correctly. And the last part of this heading is to style the A tag. For the A tag, we just need to select it inside of our project header and we will set the color of this to be white. That's it for the heading, and lastly let's style the grid items. Now before that we need to have some spacing between the header and the rest of the elements. If you have a look at our Figma design, that spacing is 48 pixels. To add this, we will first style our projects section. We will select the projects class, and that is this section here. We need to apply display flex to this. The flex direction will be column, and we will apply the gap to it to 48 pixels, and this will add that spacing between them. And now we can style our grid, and that is this project cards section. We will select the project cards, and the way we make this grid is by setting display instead of flex to grid this time. Next we set the grid template column, which is how many items we want to have inside of each row. For example, here we have 3 items in each row, and then we have 3 more items in the second row. And to set it in CSS, we use the repeat function. And the first one is how many columns do we have in each row, which is 3. And the second one is frame, so we will use the 1 frame. Next, we can also apply gap between our grid items as we do in our flex items. From the design, you can see that we have 16 pixels between each of our grid items. So we will apply 16 pixels here, and we will align items to the start. And this means that, for example, you see this project X is a bit longer section, and that ends here, but the chart nodes ends here. So in case they don't have the same height, we want to align the other items to the start, and that means to the top of this section. Now for each project cards, we need to apply the border around it, which is 1 pixels and gray. We will select the project card and set the border of it to be 1 pixel solid gray. And similarly, each image has a border below it, and that's the same border. So we will also apply this same styling to the project card and image tag inside of it. This is what we have so far, and now we need to style the unordered list. So we need to set the display of these to flex and also remove the dots from here. You see they also have some gaps between them, and that is 8 pixels. The color of this is gray, and it also has a border bottom, which is the same border that we have across this project card. And this section has some paddings. It has 8 pixel gaps, and it also has 8 pixels from left, right, and top and bottom. To style that, we will select the project card class and the UL inside of it. To remove the dots, we will set the list style to be none. Now this is also a repeating property because we are usually setting list style to none across our app, so we can move this to the global styles as well and set the list style to be none for all of the ULs. And we can go back and remove that property from all of our unordered lists. So we'll remove it from nav list, from the social links UL, and also from here. Next, we need to set the display of this to be flex, and the flex direction is row, so that is by default, we don't need to set it. The gap between our items is 8 pixels. The color of this is gray, and we'll use the same border, but only from the bottom. So we'll set the border bottom to be gray. This looks better, and we need to apply the paddings now. You'll see that by default our UL also has margins, so we need to reset it by setting margin to 0. And instead we will apply padding to be 8 pixels. So we'll copy this and paste it into our UL styles. Now you'll also notice that our second card looks a bit strange, and that is because we have this long list items, and this is taking too much space. And that is this list item here, so we need to set the rest of it to start from the new line. And for that we need to apply stylings to the UL property. And below the display flex, we need to add flex wrap property and set it to wrap. And what this does is when the line ends, it pushes the other content to the new line. And now it looks closer to our Figma design. Lastly, let's style these parts. Notice that we used 24 pixels for the heading 3. And we also have some spacings between these items. And that is 16 pixels between the heading and paragraph, and also 16 pixels between paragraph and buttons. And overall for this frame we have 16 pixel paddings from all of the sides. We'll go back and first we'll grab the project info div and we'll set the padding of it to be 16 pixels from all of the sides. We'll set the display of it to be flex and the gap, which is the gap between the items, to be 16 pixels. And yeah, we also need to set the flex direction to be column. Now you see we have some unnecessary spacing and we can determine it by inspecting it. So you'll notice that the paragraph and also the heading have margins by default and we need to get rid of these. Let's first select the heading inside of our project info. We'll set the font size to be 24 pixels. We'll reset the margin to be 0 and we will also select the paragraph and we'll set the margin of this to be 0. Last thing we need to do is to style the buttons. You'll notice that the button is also the same across the app, and we already have such button for the Contact Me section, so we can just reuse the styles of that here. For that, we'll find the contact button styles. We can copy all of this and also the hover state. And inside of our global styles, instead of setting this to contact button, we'll set these styles to all of the buttons inside of our app. And with that, we can get rid of these. And we have the same button here, and we have similar style here. We just have one difference, which is we have the A tag inside of this button, and we don't have it for the Contact Me section. So we'll need to apply stylings to the A tag inside of a button, and we'll set it globally as well. So for all of the A tags, you'll notice we are using the same color, which is white, and we are using text decoration, none, which is removing the border below the A tag. Now with that, we have this reusable button, which is the same, and we need to apply the styling only once. The only thing now we need to change is to apply the underline to this A tag. For this A tag inside of our project's header, we'll set the text decoration to be underline. And with that, we have the project section ready. Let's move on to the next section of our website, and that is the skills section. We have this image illustration on the left side, and we have skill categories on the right. These are categories like languages, databases, frameworks, and so on. And we also have this skills header, which is similar to projects. And actually it's the same, just without this A tag on the right side. Now let's go back to our HTML file and create another section below this projects section. We'll name this as skills. Inside of these skills, we need to have a similar heading as we have in the projects. And for that, let's extract another reusable class, and that will be section header. So let's rename this to be section header instead of projects header, because we are going to reuse this same part across all other sections. And we also need to go to the style and find that project header. And we need to rename all of the occurrences of projects header to section header. For that, you can grab one of them and then hit Command D or Control D on Windows. This will select the second one, and then continue to selecting all of them. Now we have our cursor on all of these projects headers, and we need to rename them to be section header. Let's just verify that it works. If we go back, you can see that we have the same header with the same styling. So we applied the styling with different class name. And now you can see why we did that, because we now can copy this and paste it inside of skills, and we just need to remove the A tag and rename this to be skills. Now if we go back, we already have this skills header, and we don't need to style it because we have a global styling that is applied to all of the headers. Next, below the header, we will have the content. So we'll create another div with a class name to be skills content. The first part is the image on the right side. So let's create an image tag with source to be assets / the path. We don't have the image yet, but let's name this skills.png. And the alt attribute of this can be something like illustration image of skills. And on the right side of this, we have the skill categories. So we'll create another wrapper div that will wrap all of these skills categories. Let's name this to be skill cards. Now here you can see we have 3 columns, 1, 2, and 3. And inside of each column, we can have 1 or 2 categories. And this means we need to create 3 divs inside of it, which will represent the columns. And then we need to add specific categories inside of these divs. First, we'll create a div called skill group. This represents one category, meaning one column. So we need to copy this 2 more times because we have 3 columns. And inside of the first one, we have only the languages. This means we'll create another div inside of this, and this will represent the row, which is languages for the first one. Let's name this to be skill category. Now if we have a look, we have one heading inside of this category, and then this is an unordered list of skills. The heading tag will be h4 because it's a small heading. This will be named languages. And below that we have this unordered list. We have list items, and each list item is one skill, like TypeScript, Lua, Python, JavaScript here. Let's just copy and paste these skills here. That's for the first row, which only contains the languages. Now in the second row, we have databases and other, and this means that we will create 2 skill categories inside of the second column. we can just copy and paste this skill category inside of our second skill group. And we need to have 2 of these here. Now we just need to rename the headings and list items. This is what we'll end up with after copying and pasting all of the skills. And lastly, in our last skill group, which is the third column, we need to copy and paste these tools and frameworks categories. This means that we can again copy this and paste it here 2 times. And then we just need to rename the headings and list items. And after renaming it, we will end up with something like this. And this is the structure of HTML that we will have. Let's just save this file and have a look at what we have now. This is our HTML structure without any CSS. First, you can see that the image is not found. And this is exactly when the alt attribute will be displayed. And this will also be used by screen readers for those of the people who cannot see the image. Now let's download that image and place it inside of our assets, and then we'll move on to styling it. You can select the group 36 here, and from the export part, let's choose this to be SVG and click on export. Now let's move this inside of our assets, and we need to name this as we named it in the image tag, and that will be skills.png, not PNG. This should be SVG. Now we'll rename this group 46 to be skills. And if we go back to our website, we have the image displayed here. Now let's style these other elements. For that, we'll go to our style.css. Below the projects, let's create another section called skills section. Let's close the navbar with Command B, and let's place the index.html on the right side so that we can see the classes that we are styling. First, we can see that we have some gap between skills and these other sections of the content, and that is 12 pixels. In this case, we can either apply margin button to the skills header, or we can again use the flexbox and use 12 pixel gap inside of our flexbox. Since you can see that the section header is reusable and we are using it in all of these sections, it's better to just style skills because we might not need that margin button across all of our sections. And for that, we'll grab the skills class. We'll apply display to be flex. And the flex direction, we need to set that to be column because the skills header needs to be on top of skills content. And we'll apply gap to be 12 pixels. Now with that, we can move on to styling skills content, where we have this image on the left side and the skill cards on the right side. And we again need to use flex, but for the skills content, we will grab the skills content class and apply display flex to it, but we'll leave the flex direction to the default, which is row, and that is because our image needs to be on the left side of our skill cards. And we'll apply one more property, which is justify content to be space between, and this means that the image will be pushed to the left side and the skill cards will be pushed on the right side. Now with that, we have our image on the left and we have our skills on the right. But you can see that all of our skills are below each other and we need to position them near each other. And that is the skill cards container, which contains 3 skill groups. We need to position these near each other. This means that we'll grab these skill cards from here and again apply display to be flex. And you can see we have some gap between the items, and that gap is 16 pixels. So we'll apply that gap to skill cards to be 16 pixels. Now you can see we positioned the skill cards near each other. So we have the languages, then the databases and other, and then the tools and frameworks. Now we also have some spacing between these items, the top and bottom ones, and this is also 16 pixels. For that, we'll grab the skill category from these tiles and we'll apply display flex, but the flex direction will be column because they are still below each other. And we did this to be able to add the gap property and set this to 16 pixels. Now we also applied the spacing between row items. You can see that each skill category is wrapped between borders, and this border is in gray color and the width of it is 1 pixels. And we also have another border below our heading tag, and that is this one, which is still 1 pixels and gray. And our heading also has paddings inside of it. It has 8 pixel paddings. One mistake that we made here, I just noticed this. We applied skill category to be flex and gap to be 16 pixels. But in fact, we need to apply it to skill group because we have skill categories inside of it. And we want to apply this gap between each skill categories. So this will be skill group. And now we will style the skill category. Here is where we need to apply the border to be 1 pixel solid and in gray color. And now we will select the H4 inside of the skill category by selecting the skill category and H4 inside of it. Let's apply the padding to be 8 pixel from all sides. We will have this same border but from the bottom. So we'll copy paste this but apply border bottom to it. And let's reset the default margins of H4. We'll set the margin to be 0. Now it's starting to look a bit like our Figma design. We have the borders around each skill category and we have the border bottom below each heading. Now we need to apply stylings to the unordered list. You can see that the skills are near each other and this is where we will use another flexbox. The skills have some paddings between them and that is 8 pixels as we can see. And this UL also has some paddings like the heading and it's again 8 pixels from left and it's 8 pixels from the top. The color of list items is in gray. And remember that we need to reset the margins of ULs because by default they have some margins set to them. If you select the UL from here, you can see that it has margin top and bottom applied to it and we need to reset this. Let's go back and select the UL inside of the skill category. First we'll apply the padding 8 pixels, which is paddings from all of the sides of this UL. Next we'll set the display to be flex so that it aligns these list items near each other. Then the gap between them was 8 pixels if you remember. Now we can select these list items individually and apply color to be gray. But a better way is to just set the gray color to the ULs and this will apply to all of the list items. And that means we won't select li items individually, we'll just apply color to be gray here and we'll reset the margins to be 0. Now the last issue that we have here, you can see the text goes beyond the borders and this is because we didn't apply flex wrap to it. We need to set the flex wrap to be wrap and this allows the elements within the skills guards and the skill items within the skill category UL to wrap to the text line if there is not enough space. Now it doesn't go beyond the borders anymore. One last thing we can fix is the heading. You can see that the headings are in bold in our design, but in Figma they are not bold. If we select the text, you can see the font weight is set to medium and that is the 500 font weight. We can go back and search for section header and find the part where we selected the H2 header inside of the heading. And here we can apply the font weight to it to be 500. And we will also reset the margin of this heading to be 0. And with that, this looks much closer to the Figma design. Now let's move on and build the About Me section. The About Me section will be pretty easy compared to the Skills section. We just have one paragraph on the left side and a button below it. And we have this image on the right side of this section. Let's go back to our HTML file and below the Skills section, let's create another section and give it a class name to be About. We'll copy the same heading that we had for the skills and we'll paste it inside of the About section. Let's just rename this to be About. And below this we have the About content. Let's create another div and give it a class name of About content. Here we have the image on the right side and the content on the left side. Let's first create the content div. Let's name this About text. Inside of this we have one paragraph tag. Let's copy the paragraph content from here and paste it inside of our paragraph. Now by default, if you save this, you can see that we don't have the breaks inside of our paragraph and all of the text is near each other as single paragraph. In this case, we can either break this down inside 3 more paragraphs, like paragraph for this one and this one, or we can use the break HTML tag and this will push the other part to the next line. Now you can see that it uses 2 breaks here. If I bring this text back here and then I use 1 break, they are now below each other, but the design uses 2 breaks to add some more spacing between each paragraph. And for that we will apply 2 breaks here after each paragraph and we'll copy and paste this after the second paragraph as well. This is how it looks like with our breaks in place. Next we'll add this button with its content. Let's copy the content. Below the paragraph, we'll add a button and the text will be read more. And lastly, after the About text, we will have the image tag. Let's go back and download this image. So this is the group 50. If you go below here, you will see export PNG. Let's export this. And let's move this inside of our assets and rename this to be about image. Now we can add an image tag below this, and the source of this will point to the assets/about image, and the alt attribute will be something like picture of alias. That's all we need to add for the about section HTML part. Now in terms of styling, we need to move this image to the right side of this text. And for that, we'll open the style.css and let's move this to the right side. Below the skills section, let's create the about section. We need to select the about content here and apply display flex to it. And this will move the image to the right side of this about text. But you can see this text is not centered with the image. And for that, we will apply align items to be center. This will center this other div with the image horizontally. Now our text width is a bit too much. In the design you can see that this text is maximum 515 pixels and this image is maximum 349 pixels width. Let's go back and apply these widths here. To apply the width to the text, we will apply it to the wrapper div. We will select the about text div and apply max width to be 515 pixels. And we will select the image by selecting the about content and the image inside of it. And we will apply max width to this to be 349 pixels. Now if we do that, we also need to apply justify content to our flex container. We need to apply justify content to be space between. And this will push the image to the right side and the text to the left side of this flex box. And one more thing we need to do is there is some spacing between the paragraph and the button, and that is 27 pixels. We will just select the about text and the paragraph inside of it and we'll apply margin bottom to be 27 pixels. That's basically it for the about section. Now let's apply a small animation to this image and we will also learn animations along with it. And we will also learn how to use keyframes in CSS. So keyframes basically controls the steps between the CSS animation. For example, we can set an animation to the image and translate it from 0% to 100% in the x-axis, and that will mean that it will go left and right. And similarly, we can use the y-axis to move it up and down. In our case, let's use the y-axis. And for that, we will first create a keyframe inside of our CSS file. And we need to name this. Let's name this up and down animation. We can select the initial and last state by selecting 0% and 100%. And here we will apply transform and we'll translate it in the y-axis. So the initial position will be 0 of this image. And then when the animation is in 50% state, we will set the transform and let's select the y property. And here we can, for example, apply minus 20 pixels, and this will mean that it will go below the 0 when the animation is in 50% state, and then it will come back when it's in 100% state. And to apply this keyframe to the image, we need to add the animation property to the animation content, and we need to give it the exact keyframe name as we did here. So this will be up and down animation. The second property is how long it will take. Let's say 4 seconds for this one. Next one is the animation type, which as you saw, we can be is in, is and out, and so on. We will set is in and out this time. And the last one is how long this animation will take. And we will set this to be infinite because we don't want this to end at some point. So we want this to be infinite animation. If we save this, now you can see we have this small animation for the image here, and this is how we use keyframes, and you can use it for anything else you want in this screen. Here we selected the image only, but you can set it to text, you can set it to buttons and anything else, or for example you can set it to be on hover state for these project cards and so on. The last section in this web page is this contacts section, where we have one paragraph on the left side and we have contacts on the right side. Let's go back to our index.html file and let's create another section below about section. And this will be called contacts. We need to copy the same header that we are using for all of these sections. And let's also name this to be contacts. And below this is the content where we have the paragraph and the contacts near each other. Let's give this a class name. Let's name this contacts content. Now the first element is the paragraph. Let's copy and paste the text from here. Near the paragraph we have this other div where we have a heading and two contacts here. We'll create that card by creating a div and give it a class name of contacts card. We will have a heading which will be an h4 and the text will be message me here. And we have two contacts here. We have the contact icon and the text near each other. For that we'll wrap each of these contacts inside of a div and we'll have this icon on the left and we'll have the text on the right side. Before doing that, let's download these images. Let's double click on this and export it as SVG. And let's do the same for the email icon. Now we'll select these icons and place them inside of our assets. The first one is Discord icon, so we'll rename it to be Discord icon. And the second one is email icon. Now in the index.html we can create a div and give it a class name of contact. On the left side we'll have the image. The first one is the Discord image, so we'll select the assets and then Discord icon. The alt attribute of this will be Discord icon. And near this image we have a text, so we'll use a span element and we'll copy and paste the username of Discord. Now we'll need to create another contact and that will be exactly the same structure, just another icon. This time it will be an email icon and in the alt text we'll say email icon. And we need to copy and paste the email text here. And that is all for the HTML structure of the contacts. Here is what we have for the contact section. The heading looks right because we copied all of these styles there. We need to position this paragraph on the left and this card on the right side. For that we'll go to our style.css and let's move this on the right side again. Below the about section, let's create another section called contacts section. First thing we'll do is to align this paragraph and the contact cards near each other. And for that we'll select their wrapper, which is contacts content. We'll apply display to be flex here. We'll justify content to be space between and this will push the paragraph to the left and the contacts card to the right. This is what we have for now. We also need to have some spacing between this section and the heading. And that spacing here is 45 pixels. This time, instead of using another flexbox, let's just apply margin top to be 45 pixels. And that will add the necessary spacing between our section and the heading. Next, the paragraph is again a bit wide. And here you can see that the maximum width of this is 505 pixels. We'll select the contacts content and paragraph inside of it and we'll apply max width to be 505 pixels. Let's also apply some margin bottom for now. We'll remove this later. We'll set this to 1000 pixels. This is just for us to be able to scroll down and have this on the center of our screen. This will be easier for us to work with. Now we also have this paragraph in the width we wanted. Next thing is to apply the borders to the card. And you can see that also the items inside of it have some spacings. And this is set to 16 pixels padding for all of the sides and also the same for this part. And for that we'll select the contacts card, which is this card right here. We'll apply border, which is the same border that we use, 1 pixel solid and in gray color. And we'll also apply paddings from all of the sides and this will be 16 pixels. With that we also have the borders. You can see the heading again causes some unnecessary margins from top and bottom. We just need to apply some bottom spacing for this heading and that should be 16 pixels. And also the font weight, you can see this time it's semi-bold and semi-bold corresponds to 600 font weight. So we'll grab the H4 inside of the contacts card. First we'll reset the margin top to be 0 pixels. But from margin bottom we need to apply the spacing, which is 16 pixels. And the font weight of this will be 600. With that we also have the heading styles and last thing we need is to style these items. Now these items have 8 pixel spacing between them. The text color and also icon color is gray. And we also have some spacing between the icon and the text and that is 9 pixels. For that we'll grab the contact class, which is the class of each item. First we'll apply the text color, which will be gray. Then we need to set the display to be flex, and this will enable us to use the gap between them, and we can now apply the gap to be 9 pixels. And we'll also align items to be center, and this will align this text and also the images to be centered horizontally. And we also need to apply margin top to be 8 pixels, which is the 8 pixel gap between this contact and this contact. And the last thing for our contacts section, you can see this is not on the same line as this. And if we inspect this, you can see that is because this paragraph again has some margin top, which we need to reset. And if you remove the margin top or set it to 0, this will align them on the same line, and we just need to apply that in our styling. Here where we selected the paragraph, we'll just add one more thing, which is margin top to be 0. And this was the last section in our main container. Now the last thing in this page is this footer. Let's complete this web page by creating the footer of it. For the footer, we will use another semantic element, which is called footer. Before we had this footer element, we were using just a regular div to style the footer. But now that we have this semantic element, almost all websites use this footer element to style their footer. We'll go back to our HTML file, and this will be outside of the main container. If you remember, we have this header, which is the navbar. We have this social links div, which is the social links on the left side. And then we had the main content, and this footer will be below all of this, and this will be the last element before the body. So we'll create this footer, and you can see that the footer content is again wrapped within the same width as the main content. And for that, we'll use another container inside of the footer. We had this main container inside of the main, and similarly, we will have the footer container inside of the footer. Now inside of this container, we have two main parts. The first part is this content, and the last part is this copyright text. To separate that, we will create a div for the content, and let's name this footer content. And below this div, we will have the copyright text, which is just a paragraph. Let's also give it a class name. Let's name this copyright. And we'll copy and paste this text inside of our paragraph. Now let's see what we have inside of the footer content. We have a flex box where on the left side we have this email and the logo and some text. And we have this part on the right side, which is media with social links. That means we'll add two sections beside of this. The first one will be the left part, which will be called footer info. And let's duplicate this, and this is the right part. And we can rename this to be footer media on the right side. Inside of footer info, we have one text below it, and we have this icon, the text, and also the email. First, let's just add them below each other, and then we'll decide how we are going to group them. So here inside of the footer info, first thing we have is the image. The source of this is the logo, which we have already. The alt attribute will be website logo. And let's give this a class name to be logo image. On the right side of this, we have a heading. And this is a small heading. Let's just name this h4. And this will be the alias text. And then we also had the email. Now the email, we can make this an A tag. We'll copy and paste this email there. And one useful thing we can do in the A tag, we can use the href. And here, if you use the mail to and two dots here, and you put the email here, if the user on the website clicks on this email, it will automatically redirect them to composing new email and sending it to this email. And the last thing we had is the paragraph. And we'll copy and paste the paragraph text here. That's it for this part. And for the footer media, we have one heading. And we have three social icons, the ones that we already downloaded, which is GitHub, Figma, and Discord. For that, inside of the footer media, we'll add a heading. Let's make this an h3 tag, and let's name this media. And below this, we have three images, where the first one, the source is GitHub, so assets and GitHub icon. And the alt text will be GitHub icon. And let's duplicate this two more times. The second one is Figma icon. And this third one is the Discord icon. And we'll need to rename the alt attributes as well. So this one is Figma icon and the last one is Discord icon. And if we go back, this is what we have for the footer. Now we can remove this unnecessary margin bottom that we set previously. So if we open up style.css, let's close the navbar and place this on the right side. If you remember, we set margin bottom to this contacts content to be able to work with it easily. Now we can remove it. And let's create a new section for the footer. Let's name this footer. First, you can see that the footer has border from the top, and this is 1 pixel gray. And we can also apply some margin from top of it, like 145 pixels that we have here. And it also has some internal paddings. So here it has 32 pixels from top and bottom. Now let's go back and grab the footer element for that without the class. First, the border top of this will be 1 pixel solid and gray color. We'll have paddings from top and bottom, and that will be 32 pixels from top and bottom and 0 from the sides. And the margin top of this, we will set it to be 145 pixels. With that, we have the spacing between the contacts and footer and the border and also the internal paddings. Now we need to center this element and also set the maximum width to it. For that, we'll select the footer container. First, let's apply maximum width to it to be 1024 pixels as we have for the main container. And to center this, we'll apply margin to be 0 auto. And this will center the footer container and also apply the max width to it. Now in the footer content, we need to push this part to the left and this part to the right, and we will do that with flex. We need to select the footer content, which contains the footer info and footer media. We'll select the footer content and we'll apply display flex to this. And to push the items to the left and right, if you remember it, it will be justify content and we'll select space between. This now moves this part to the left and this part to the right. Now here you can see that the logo and the hashtag are near each other, and in our case it's below each other. To be able to group this, we need to wrap them inside of another div and apply display flex to it. And that are these image and heading tags, so we'll cut this and create another div wrapper. Let's name this footer logo and we'll place the image and heading tag inside of it. Now with that, we can go into style CSS and we can select this footer logo and we can apply display to be flex, and this will actually move them near each other, but as you can see they are not centered. For that, we'll also apply align items to be center, and this will align them horizontally. And you can see we also have 9 pixel gap between them. Let's also apply gap to this and set it to be 9 pixels. Now another thing we need to do is we need to move this email to be near this logo, and for now we have them below each other. And that's why we need to wrap these two elements again inside of another container div. So we need to group this A tag and also this footer logo inside of another div. For that, let's cut them from here. Let's create another div and let's name this footer logo wrapper. Now we can paste these elements here, and with that we can now grab this footer logo wrapper inside of our styles, and we can use another flex box for this wrapper, and this will move this A tag and this part near each other. If we save this and have a look, they are now near each other. As you can see, they are again not positioned correctly, and we will align them to be centered again. And we also need to apply the gaps between them, which is 24 pixels. So let's go back here and apply align items to be center, and let's apply gap to be 24 pixels. Now this looks better. We need to style this A tag. As you can see here, it's in gray. And let's maybe also add some small animation when we hover on it on the A tag and then we hover off it. For that, let's select the A tag that is inside of this footer logo wrapper. First, let's apply color to it to be gray. But then let's select this again, but in hover mode this time. And when we hover on it, let's set the color to become white. And to make this transition smoother, let's apply transition here. This is similar of what we did for the button. And here we can set when we are applying this transition. For our case, we will apply it on the color property. The second part is the delay, which let's say half seconds. And the third part is the type of animation. This time let's select ease and save. And now you can see it's in gray, which looks correct. And if we hover on it, it slowly becomes white. And if we hover off it, it slowly becomes gray. Let's also make sure this paragraph looks correct. In this case, the paragraph needs to be in white. And the top spacing for this is 16 pixels. We'll select this paragraph, which is inside of the footer info. First, we'll select the footer info and then paragraph inside of it. First, let's set the color to be white. And let's set the margin top to be 16 pixels. That's it for the paragraph, but I think this margin is bigger than 16 pixels. Let's inspect it. You can see for paragraph it's 16 pixels. The div doesn't have any unnecessary margins. And inside of the footer logo, we have this image, and then we have this H4, which has these unnecessary margins. So we will reset the margins for H4. We'll go back to our styles, and below the footer logo, let's select the footer logo and the heading 4 inside of it, and let's reset the margins to be 0. Now that looks better, and we have completed this left side. Let's now style this right side, and then finally we'll do the paragraph. Now on the right side we have this heading. It should be in 24 pixel size and medium font weight. And the spacing between this and the icons should be 12 pixels. Let's go back and select it in the style.css. We'll select the footer media and the heading 3 inside of that. Let's apply margin bottom to this to be 12 pixels. And if you remember, this will have a default margin top. Let's reset it by setting margin top to be 0. The font size of this should be 24 pixels. And the font weight was medium, which is the same as 500. That's it for the heading. Now these images shouldn't be just images, but they should be clickable icons. And for that we need to wrap these images inside of A tags. So we'll create an A tag, and we need to set the href attribute. For this one it should point to GitHub repository. For now I will just set this to be empty. And then we can paste the image inside of it. And we need to do the same for all of the other images. And with that we can save this and go back. Now if you hover on it, the cursor becomes pointer. And if you have set the correct links, if you click on it, this will bring to Discord or to GitHub and so on. And finally, let's style this copyright text. Firstly, we just need to center this, and then we need to apply some margin top for it, which is 48 pixels, and also margin bottom to it, which is 32 pixels. We can select it by its class name, which is copyright. So we'll select the copyright and we'll set the text align to be center, and this will center our paragraph. And let's apply the margins. So margin top was 48 pixels and margin bottom was 32 pixels. If we save and have a look, now we have the final look of our footer and our paragraph is nicely centered. And that is it for the footer part. We finalized creating our first website, which is with pure HTML and CSS, and this looks very close to the initial Figma design that we had. Now if you inspect our website and set it to mobile view, you can see that this is not responsive and it doesn't look right on the mobile phones. And that is what we will cover in the responsive UI section. We will make our website responsive by using media queries and techniques. If you have a look at the examples like Airbnb's website, if you inspect element and click on this device icon and select something like iPhone SE, you can see how this website's layout changes completely when we switch from desktop to mobile view. In that case, the content rearranges and the font size adjusts based on your screen size. And even some elements might disappear or change their positions. And this is all achieved by using responsive design techniques. In this lesson, we'll dive into what responsive design is, why is it so important. We'll learn about media queries and breakpoints that we use in code to apply responsive design. And we'll also learn techniques to make websites adapt to different screen sizes. Let's start by understanding why responsive design is so important. The first important part is the user experience. People use a wide range of devices to access web like desktops, laptops, tablets and phones and even smartwatches nowadays. And responsive design ensures that your website is usable in all of these devices. Next benefit is the SEO. Search engines like Google prioritize responsive websites in their search results. So if you're building a website and you apply responsive design techniques there, then Google engines or other search engines will prioritize your website. And lastly, it's the future proofing. New devices are coming up with different screen sizes, and responsive design helps your website to stay relevant and functional as technology evolves. But how does responsive design actually work? At its core, responsive design relies on two main tools. The first one is flexible layouts. We use CSS techniques like Flexbox and Grid that we learned to create layouts that can adapt to different screen widths. And the second main tool is media queries. These are special CSS rules that allow us to apply different styles based on different screen sizes. But let's see what this really means in action. Media queries are essentially conditional rules in CSS. They let us say things like if the screen width is less than X pixels, then apply these styles, or if the device is in portrait mode, then apply these styles, or if the user prefers dark mode, apply these styles, if they prefer light mode, apply these styles, and so on. And what about the breakpoints? Well, breakpoints are the specific screen widths or conditions where we want our layout or styles to change. And these are the common breakpoints for mobile, tablet, and desktop devices. And let's see how we use them in action. We write media queries inside of our CSS file. Here is an example of that. You can set the max width to be this many pixels and then apply specific styles for these devices. And the last part in this first lesson, let's learn about responsive design tips and tricks that you can use. The first one is you start by mobile first approach, and this means that you start by designing for the smallest screen first. For example, you start with the smallest iPhone or smallest Android device and then gradually increase the size. And this helps you prioritize essential content and create a solid foundation for your design. Then you can use media queries to progressively enhance the layout and styles for larger screens like tablets and desktop. Next tip is you can use relative units instead of fixed pixel values for sizes and spacing. You can use relative units like percentages, EMs, RMs, and so on, and this will allow your design to scale proportionally to different screen sizes. Next, you can use flexible images. Make sure your images are flexible and can resize to fit the container width. You can use the max width 100% for example to achieve this and other techniques like that. You should also consider how users will interact with your website on touchscreens, and this means that you need to make buttons and links large enough to be able to tap easily and avoid layouts that require precise hovering. And the last tip is to prioritize the content and think about the most important content for each screen size and prioritize it accordingly. For example, as you will see in our portfolio website, you might need to hide or rearrange certain elements on smaller screens to maintain a clean and usable layout. And by applying these tips and tricks, you can create responsive designs that are both beautiful and functional across a wide range of devices. And in this section, we will use these tips and media queries and breakpoints to make our portfolio website look better on mobile screens as well. Now let's make our portfolio website responsive and make sure that it looks good on mobile and tablet devices. And if we go back to our Figma design, on the left side of this, you can see that designer provided us with the mobile view of this website. Here we have the navbar of it and the first part of the main container content and also the navbar on the open state. But we will actually style all of the parts of this website and make sure that it looks good on tablets and mobile devices. And before making this responsive, let's just quickly fix two things here. If you remember, on the navbar, we have some margins between our items, and that is 32 pixels. And we applied it on our list items. If you select one of our list items, you can see that we have 16 pixels from left and right sides of this. But a better way to apply this spacing is to actually use the gap property on the UL that wraps these list items. And that will make our job easier when styling the mobile view, because if you see on the left side here, we have the nav items below each other. And in case of mobile view, we can just set flex direction to column and these 32 pixels will still be applied there. And for that, we will find where we set this margin to 16 pixels. We can get rid of these styles for the list item. And the nav list is our UL item where we can apply the gap property. So we can set the gap here to be 32 pixels. And our navbar appearance will still be the same, but now we are applying these gaps and in the mobile view, this will be easier to style for us. And the second thing that you guys noticed is that we have this small spacing between our logo image and the logo. And if you hold the option key, you can see this is 2.5 pixels from here. But actually, if you zoom in, you can see it's 8 pixels from the text and it's 2.5 from top and bottom. And we can easily fix that by finding these 2.5 pixels and just update it to be 8 pixels. And with that, we can now actually start styling this for the mobile view. For that, first let's go to the inspector and then click on this small icon which will toggle the device toolbar. Here you can, for example, select iPhone SE, which is one of the smallest screen sizes, and you can see how our website looks like on the mobile view. As you can see, this is not usable at all on the mobile screen, and we also have this ugly horizontal scroll bar. And generally, horizontal scrolling is a negative user experience. as it requires users to move the content horizontally to view what you have on the right side. And we need to get rid of horizontal scrolling in the mobile view and also in the tablets. Let's start from the beginning of our website, and here we have this navbar. As you can see in the Figma design, the social links are disabled here. And that means that we need to hide these social links from the left side and also these nav items on the top. Instead of that, we have this burger icon, and we see our nav items only when clicking on this burger icon. Let's start by hiding these social links and the nav items from the screen. For that, we will find the nav list in our CSS styles. Now here, the way we style this for only mobile view is by using media queries, and for that we use @media. And here we can set the breakpoint, which is generally the device width. If you remember, for the mobile view we use 320 pixels minimum, and the maximum width of this is 480 pixels. This is the range that we'll style for the mobile devices. But this is not the correct CSS syntax. Instead, we need to set min width here to be 320 pixels, and we can use the AND operator and apply max width to this, and the max width will be 480 pixels. And inside of this we can write the styles that we need to apply only for the mobile view. For example, here I can select the navlist class, which is our UL item, and set display of this to be none. And this will hide it in the mobile devices. If you have a look, we don't have our navlist here, and instead we will show the burger icon on the right side. As you can see, our media query works like this, but we can actually get rid of the min width from here, and generally this is sufficient enough. You can just use max width and set this to the maximum mobile width, which is 480 pixels in general. You can use specific ranges like this whenever you need them, but in general this is easier to use and also easier to read from other developers. Now let's also hide the social links from here. And for that we will find the social links class from our style.css. And here we will apply another media query and we'll set the max width to be 480 pixels. And in this scenario we will set the social links and display to be none. Now you can see it is hidden from our screen. And one more important thing to understand here is if I move this, for example, above these social links, you can see that this is not applied here. And if you right click, inspect, and go to the social links class, you can see that we actually have this style, but it is overwritten by these social links. And that is because styles in CSS cascade down from top to bottom, and the more specific selectors override the more general ones. And in our case, this social links comes after this media query, and it overrides this display property, and it sets this to flex. So it's important to place this after the social links, so that we make sure that these styles override these ones. And now we can download our burger icon. So you can click on this frame 60 and export this as SVG. And now we can drag and drop this into our assets, and let's rename this as burger icon. And let's add this in our index.html. So in the navbar we have our logo wrapper, and then we have our list, which is disabled now. And after this we can place our image. The source of this will be assets, then burger icon. Let's give it an alt attribute and name this navbar burger icon. And let's also set some class to this so that we can grab it in our CSS. Let's name this burger icon. Now by just adding that image, you can see that we have it on the right side of our screen. But if I toggle off the mobile view, you can see that we also have it in our desktop view, and we want to hide it from here. And for that we will grab the image item by our class name that we set, which is burger icon. And here we can set the display of this to be none, but it is also hidden from the mobile view, and we can override that in our media query. For example, here we can select the burger icon and set the display of this to be block. And with that, this is shown on the mobile view, but it is hidden in the desktop view. And one other thing we need to apply is the paddings from the sides of this navbar. As you can see here, we have paddings from the left, which is 16 pixels. Here, if we select the header, you can see that we have 16 pixels from the left, right, and also from the top. And for that, we need to grab our navbar from the top, but in the media query. Let's add another media query here for the max width of 480 pixels. And here we can select the navbar and apply padding to it to be 16 pixels. But this should be only from left, top, and right sides. So on the bottom, this should be 0. We will apply padding bottom for that, and we'll set this to be 0. And now we have some spacing from the left and from the right side. But from top, this looks larger than we want to. And that is because we have some more paddings on the header wrapper. And that is these styles here. We have some padding from the top and from the bottom. And we can easily get rid of that by selecting header here and setting padding to be 0. And with this, our navbar looks just like our Figma design. Now let's style our hero section. As you can see, our main container has 16 pixel paddings from the sides, and that is the same for all of our items here. And also our items are below each other instead of near each other as we have here. And we used Flexbox to style this, and as you will see shortly, Flexbox will make our job a lot easier. We can just change the flex direction to be column in most cases, and that will be enough for the mobile view. And for that we need to go back and grab the hero in the media query. Now you'll see we are repeating this media query a lot, and we are setting the same max width here to be 480 pixels. And we can actually group all of them, for example this media query and this one and the one on the top. And we can move all of them to the bottom of our style.css and apply all of the stylings here. So that's another option that you can use if you don't want to repeat this media query over and over. But I think this is easier for beginners to understand because we are writing it just below the styles, and you can easily see the difference between the desktop and mobile styles. Now here we are styling this hero section, and that is this section that contains the content and the image. First of all, we will grab the main container here, and we will set padding to this to be 16 pixels from all of the sides. And then we can grab the hero content, and we will set the flex direction to be column. And this will move our image below the hero content instead of showing them side by side. You can see our image is now at the bottom of our text, and we have these 16 pixel paddings from the sides. But the spacing between navbar and the main content is a bit too much. And if you look here, it should be 34 pixels. And our big margin is coming from this hero section where we have this margin top 62 pixels. This was for the desktop view, but for the mobile view we will apply different margin top and we will set this to be 34 pixels. And with that we have this first part of hero content. Now we need to style this image. You can see this is very large and it goes beyond the width of this device. And it should also have paddings of 22 pixels from the sides. And that is this hero image class, and for that we'll copy our media query and we'll paste it after the portfolio node wrapper. Now here we will first select this hero image and we'll set the paddings of it to be 0 and 22 pixels from the sides. And here we will also select the image inside of our hero image and we will apply width to this to be 100%, and this means that it shouldn't go beyond the borders of our device. And we will apply these same styles for the portfolio node wrapper. And that is because this wrapper also goes beyond the borders. So we'll separate this with comma and apply the same styles to the portfolio node wrapper. And with that you can see that our image now looks good along with our portfolio node. And that is how we have it in Figma. Now the next sections after this are not provided in the Figma, but we will continue from here and we will style the sections one by one to make sure it looks good on the mobile. And then we'll also apply these styles for the tablets. Next, let's style this quote section and maybe let's make the font size of it a bit smaller and also the paddings. For example, the font size of this we can maybe set it to be 18 pixels, and the padding instead of 32 we can set this to 24 pixels. And let's also make the fig caption a bit smaller. We'll set the font size to be the same size, 18 pixels, and I think we can leave the padding as it is for the fig caption. So we'll copy the font size and padding from the block quote, and for that we need to select this quote section and the block quote and fig captions inside of it. For that we'll find these quote stylings in our style.css, and below the block quote and the fig caption stylings we'll add a media query. We'll again set the max width of this device to be 480 pixels, and inside of this we'll apply stylings for the quote block quote element inside of it. And we'll paste these styles that we copied from the browser. And let's also apply the font size to this and set it to be 18 pixels. And next you'll notice that inside of each section we have the section name and this line on the right side, and this line now doesn't look that great on the mobile view. And since we are reusing the same section header class across all of our sections, this will be easy to fix. We can just find the section header class here and the after element, which is the line. And before this we can apply the same media query for the mobile view. And we can select this same after element and we can set the display of this to be none. And this will hide it for all of our sections, not just the projects, but also for skills, about, and also for the contacts. And below this you can see our grid items of the projects, and they are 3 columns for now. And we can set this to be 1 item in the mobile view and still be 3 items for the desktop view. And another thing that I noticed is that these grid items go beyond the project section. And that is because we forgot to apply stylings to the image inside of each project card. So if we just apply width to each image and set this to be 100%, this will fix that issue, and now our items are just inside of the project section. So first let's fix that by going to the project cards, and below this let's apply another styles to the project cards image, and let's set the width of this to be 100%. And now we can style our project cards in the mobile view. So we'll select it in the media query. And here we will grab the project cards, which is this div here. Now here we will set the grid template columns, but this time instead of setting it repeat for 3 frames, we will set this to auto fit, and the second argument will be min max of 300 pixels and 1 frame. And this means that the columns will automatically adjust their size to fit the container width. And each column will have a minimum width of 300 pixels, and this will grow to fill in any available space inside of this 1 frame. And if we save this, we now have our grid items below each other. But you may notice one small issue here. Our image inside of the project cards goes beyond the borders a little bit, and we can fix that by applying object fit to it to be cover, and also applying box sizing to be border box. So this first property specifies that it needs to resize to maintain its aspect ratio, and the second property includes the padding and border of this element in its total width and height. And with that we fixed the image issue, and our project section also looks good. Now we can move on to the skills, where we have this image and the skills on the right side. In this case I think we can hide this skills image and just show these items below each other. For that we need to select the skills section in our style.css. Let's go below the skill cards and create another media query. In the desktop view you can see that the skill content display is set to flex, and also the same for the skill cards. And this means that the image is near the skill cards, and also each of these skill groups are near each other. And we can override that by first selecting the skills content. And let's also select the skill cards along with it. And we can set the flex direction of this to be column in the mobile view. And this will position our skills below each other instead of near each other. And we can also get rid of this image by selecting the image inside of the skill content and setting the display of this to be none. And with that we get rid of our image. Now there is another property you can use for hiding elements, and that is visibility hidden. And to understand the difference of this, let's just save this and go back to our browser. You can see that the image is still hidden, but it takes space in our DOM, and that is because when you set the visibility to hidden, it still takes the space that it needs in the DOM. Whereas if you set display to none instead of this, it just disappears from our screen, and that is the property that we need to use. Now we can also apply some small spacing between the skills header and the sections. You can see that we have some small spacing for the desktop view, but we can increase this in the mobile view and select the skills and make the gap, let's say 36 pixels. And with that our skills section is also ready. Now we can move on to the about section. In this about section we also have an image on the right side of our content, and then we have the about text on the left side. We can find the about content styling in our style.css. And below it we can apply our media queries for the mobile view. First we will override the flex direction of about content to be column, and this will place our image below our content because it doesn't fit on the mobile view. If we save it, this is what we have currently. We have the text and the image below it. Now I think the image looks a bit large, so we can either decrease the width of it or just get rid of it completely and not display it on the mobile view. So that is what I will do here. I will select the about content and image inside of it, and I will set the display of it to be none. And that's it for the about section. Let's also style the contacts. We have this text on the left side and then the contacts on the right side. And that's inside of our contacts section. This is the text, which is a paragraph item, and then we have the contacts card. So we can just select the contacts content below these styles here. And we can set the flex direction of this to be column. And that should be it for the contact section. I think this looks good. And also we got rid of the horizontal scrolling. So the last thing we need to style is the footer. For the footer, I think it's fine having this logo and the email near each other. We just need to move these media items to the bottom of it. And that is inside of our footer content. We have this footer information and then we have these media items. To place them below each other, we will just find the footer content where we have these tags for it. And below this, we'll add another media query and we'll select the footer content and we can set the flex direction to be column in the mobile view. And that moves it to the bottom of this text. Let's maybe also apply some small gap between them, like 16 pixels. And now we need to apply some spacing paddings from the left and right side to match with our main content. And that should be the same 16 pixels. And we need to apply that style on the footer container here. So below this we will select the footer container and we will set the padding of this to be 16 pixels in the mobile view. And that adds the necessary spacing from the left. And the last thing that we can do is to decrease the spacing for the footer. For the desktop view, as you can see, we set this to be 145 pixels and that is a bit large for the mobile view. And we also have paddings from top and bottom for the footer. Let's go back here and also select the footer element. Let's decrease this margin top that we had here. Let's apply another margin top and set this to be 45 pixels maybe. And let's also decrease the padding. For the desktop view we have 32 pixels. Let's set this to be maybe 16 pixels. And that's it for the footer section. If you have JavaScript skills, you can add the functionality of these burger icons. So when clicking on this, you just need to open the model. And then you just need to stack these items by setting the flex direction to be column. And then show this X icon here instead of the burger icon when it is open. So now it looks good on both mobile and also for the desktop. But we haven't checked it for the tablets, and for that you can go here and select, for example, iPad Air. And this is how it looks like on the iPads. Making this responsive for the tablets will be much easier than doing it for the mobile, because we already have the base styles in place for the responsive design. We just need to go back to our styles where we applied styles for the mobile view and think which of these we want to also apply for the tablets. For example, here we removed the paddings from the header and also added some paddings from the sides of the navbar. And as you can see, we need that same styles here because currently our navbar doesn't have any spacings from the edges. So we can just copy this media query and apply the same styles for the tablet. And if you remember from the first lesson of this section, the tablet size is from 768 to 1024 pixels. But instead of setting another range from 768 to 1024 pixels, we just apply max width to this and set the maximum to be 1024. And that means that we apply these styles only for the tablets. And anything above 1024 is either laptop or desktop, so we apply the base styles in that case. But instead of duplicating this code, since we have the same stylings for the tablet and also for the mobile, we can get rid of the mobile styles. And this means that anything below these pixels, which is tablets and also mobile phones, will have these stylings. And anything above that will have the base stylings for the desktop and laptops. With that, you can check we have the same styling for here and also for the iPhone SE, for example. And we also need to hide the social icons and make this text and image below each other instead of side by side. For that, we'll go to our next media query. We won't touch this part, which is setting the burger icon for the mobile view and then hiding it here because we don't want to show the burger icon in the tablet. But if we scroll a bit more, you can see this other media query, which is setting the flex direction to be column for the mobile view and also updates the margins and paddings for the mobile view. Let's try applying this to the tablet as well. So let's just change this to be 1024 pixels and save. And I think this also looks good for the tablet view. Next, we also need to hide these social icons from the tablet view. And for that, we'll find the social link styles. And we will apply the same styles, which is display none for the social skills for the tablets, by just making this 1024 pixels. And that gets rid of the left side icons. The quote section, I think it looks good on the tablet. We can still show the free grid items on the tablet, and that is also correct. Let's also remove these lines from the section headers. And that is the part where we style the section header. If you scroll a bit down from the section header, you'll find this media query, which sets the after display property to be none. We'll apply the same thing for the tablets by setting this to 1024 pixels. And that also gets rid of the lines here. So I think our project section looks good on the tablet. And next, for the skills, we can get rid of this image maybe, but still show our items on the right side. For that, we will go to the skills section, and here where we have the media queries, I'll add another media query here because we don't want to set these other properties in case of tablet. So we'll create another media query, and the max width of this will be 1024 pixels. And in this case, I will only apply this style, which is setting the image display to be none. And that also fixes our skills section. And for the about part, I think just making this image a bit smaller will fix our tablet view. In the about section, below our media query for the mobile, let's add another media query. And this will be for the tablet view. And let's copy these image styles here. Let's just make the maximum width of this a bit smaller, maybe something like 250 pixels, and save. And with that, I think our about section also looks good on the tablet. We don't need to modify anything for the contact section. And the last thing we might do is to also add some spacings for the footer from the left and right sides of it. We'll go to the footer, which is the last part in our style CSS. And let's add another media rule here for the tablet view. And we can copy this style from the mobile view only and set the paddings from the sides of this footer. And with that, our footer also looks better on the tablet view. And you can check and see we don't have any horizontal scrolls. And I think this also looks good on the tablet. And just to verify that we didn't break anything on the mobile view, let's switch back to one of the phones here. And we can see that this looks good on the phone view as well. And let's finally go back to the desktop view. We still have our same desktop view as well. So this means that our portfolio website is now responsive. And with that, we have our portfolio website's homepage ready. And it's also responsive, which looks good on both tablets and mobile phones. I recommend you build the other pages of this same portfolio website, for example the projects page or the about page and contacts page, and also try to make them responsive, each of the pages. And this will be a good practice for you to sharpen your HTML and CSS skills. And shout out to the designer who let us use his design throughout this course. You can check out his profile in Figma and maybe build some other projects that he has in the community tab. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed this hands-on approach to building your portfolio website. You can find all the resources that I mentioned in the description. And if you'd like to learn more advanced skills like CSS preprocessors such as Sass or CSS frameworks like Bootstrap or Tailwind, or dive deeper into web development, then you can join our free web developers community, the link of which will be in the description.